Hello friends, in this video we will be taking a look at the autosomal DNA, predicted phenotype, traits, and GD match results of 4 Yamnayan individuals from Samara. Samara is a city in central Russia located on the Volga River. This video will conclude my series on Yamnaya from Samara genomes, as I have now covered every Samara Yamnayan genome. This does not mean you won't see any other Yamnaya videos, it just means you won't see any other Yamnaya Samara videos. I have a long way to go until I cover all pit grave culture samples from the Caucasus, Ukraine, and other places. I'm just saying that at this point, Samara is done. And a bit of introduction into these samples is needed. These people who I arbitrarily named Andrew, like myself, Andrei, but Andrew is kind of the Western English version, Matthew, Natalia, and Sergei, they are all part of the Proto Indo-European Yamnaya culture. They were a nomadic people who spread their language all over Eurasia. Their paternal lineages trace back to the eastern hunter-gatherers of Europe, while their maternal lineages derive from the Caucasus. And in terms of deeper Mesolithic admixtures, these people are roughly half eastern hunter-gatherer and the other half Caucasian hunter-gatherer. Let's begin with the video. We're gonna start with the phenotype. Here's what Sergei looked like. Sergei's got brown color eyes, snub-shaped nose, and brown color hair according to my NOSHACOT tool. For hair shape prediction, it was done with 4 SNPs. He's got wavy followed by curly hair. But keep in mind, this was done with only 4 SNPs, so it's maybe not the most accurate prediction. Not the most precise prediction, I should say. And he's got eye shape prediction. His eye shape prediction is actually that he has South Asian or Middle Eastern or Estonian eye shape, and this was done, by the way, with 14 SNPs. So once again, the precision maybe not so great. He likely has blue eye haplotype 1, no blue eye haplotype 2, no blue eye haplotype 3, and no blue eye haplotype 4. If you look at his genotype in SLC 45A2 and a SIP, he likely has lighter skin color and other traits, and he actually carries one of the ginger variants in MC1R, ginger hair, although he doesn't really have ginger hair because he has darker genotypes in OCA2 region, which do contribute to having a black or brown hair color instead of ginger or blonde. And he doesn't have any derived variants in SLC 24A4, which means higher odds of heterochromia and darker eyes. Now let's get on to Matthew. This is Matthew's phenotype. In Matthew's file, there is no genotype for the main variation in BEH2, hence why YSEC depicted him the way they did. YSEC is unfortunately not capable of imputation. YSEC is just overall grossly incompetent as a phenotype predictor tool. My NOSHACOT, as you can see, is much better. With my NOSHACOT tool, he's got hazel or brown color eyes, Greek-shaped nose, and black hair. He has blue eye haplotype 1 and blue eye haplotype 4, which is very surprising, and I'm going to tell you why. And he does not have blue eye haplotype 2 or blue eye haplotype 3. The reason blue eye haplotype 4 is very surprising is because you wouldn't expect a Yamnaya to have it. It's most common in Basques, actually, in Europe, and it's pretty infrequent in Northern Europe. You don't see any Northern Europeans with blue eye haplotype 4, but he's homozygous for it, which is just very surprising. Which is actually the reason he has such a high score for hazel eyes and not just brown and dark brown. For eye shape prediction, he's got Estonian eye shape. No hair shape prediction is possible for him. And on the screen I wrote some light coloring variants that he has. In red are the most common, the most important variants. In green are sort of the secondary or the lesser important variants. And in blue are variants that are not so important. Now we're moving on to the phenotype of Andrew. Andrew has got brown color eyes, snub-shaped nose, and black hair. For my hair shape prediction, he's got straight hair. That was done with only 2 SNPs, so take that with a grain of salt. For eye shape prediction, he's got Middle Eastern or Estonian or South Asian eye shape. That was done with 10 SNPs. He does not have blue eye haplotype 1 or any of the blue eye haplotypes that follow, and he's actually the darkest of the 4 individuals. He's got white Eurasian skin based on his genotypes in SLC 24A5, ASIP, and KIT-LG, and he actually has the blue eye and red hair and pale skin IRF4 variant. Almost all European hunter-gatherers, Western and Eastern, had this variant. Modern Europeans do to a much lesser extent, aside from the Irish, who actually have it to they have a pretty high frequency of the derived variant in this IRF4 variation. But aside from Irish, it's pretty much nobody else in Europe, and he does not have any ginger variants in MC1R. Now finally we arrive to Natalia. Natalia has got brown color eyes or hazel comet number 2 at 33.7% likelihood. She's got a snub-shaped nose and red hair. That's right, she actually is predicted to have red hair with my NOSHACOT tool. For hair shape prediction, that's straight. For eye shape prediction, she's got Estonian eye shape. She's heterozygous for BEH1, no blue eye haplotype 2 or 3 or 4. However, she does have some genotypes in OCA2 region that are predictive of blue eye haplotype 2, which is kind of confusing, and it's part of the reason why she's predicted to have light hair color. She has white European skin based on her genotype in SLC24A5, ASIP, and SLC45A2, and she also has, just like Andrew, she has one derived variant in this IRF4 variation, European hunter-gatherer, blue eye, and red hair and pale skin variant, and in her case, it did contribute to her getting a red hair score, but the main contributor, of course, is that she is a red hair carrier in one of the MC1R variations, and I'm pretty sure that this specific variation, the red hair allele, is most frequent in Spanish people, but I'm just speaking from my memory here. I'm not exactly sure. For the GED match results, we'll be looking at Natalia, because Natalia is the highest quality file of the 4, and they all score kind of similar to each other because they're one culture, they're one ancestral cluster. Natalia is closest to Ukrainians from Belgorod with Eurogenes K13, and she's actually getting modeled as a mixture of Erzya plus people from Dagestan, or a mixture of Northeast European plus people from Dagestan. This is what she scores with MDL-PK11 Modern, which is a very interesting calculator. You see she's scoring mostly EHG. The EHG component here is not European hunter-gatherers, it's Caucasus shift, so that's 42% Caucasus-related admixture. And with the Oracle, she's closest to Afanasyevo, followed by Yamnaya, followed by Poltavka, which is also like Yamnaya 2.0. And this is what the Oracle, the mixed mode Oracle, looks like. So there seems to be a little bit of sub-Saharan African shift in her result. This is what she scores with Harappa World. With Harappa World, as you can see, she's scoring 29% Baloch, and she's not scoring much of the Caucasian category. That's right, Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Yamna in particular, the Caucasus admixture in them tends to get modeled as Baloch with Harappa World rather than Caucasian, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting dynamic. You might not have known about this. And she's getting modeled as a mixture of Finnish plus Brahwi or Makrani or Balochi with the Oracle. This is what she scores with PanDNA LK10. Here you can see she's scoring 45% CHG, but this calculator tends to really overinflate the amount of Caucasus admixture in Europeans. The reality, in terms of how much CHG admixture she has, is going to be somewhere between the PanDNA LK10 and the PanDNA LK12 results. With PanDNA LK10, she's getting modeled as a mixture of Lithuanian plus Makrani or Brahwi or Baloch, basically South Central Asian or Southwest Pakistani. And this is what she scores with PanDNA LK12. Here you can see she's scoring less Caucasus HG, only 41%. As I've said, the reality is that she has her Caucasus hunter-gatherer admixture somewhere between the PanDNA LK12 and the PanDNA LK10 result, between 41 and 44% Caucasus hunter-gatherer admixture. And with the Oracle here, she's closest to Yamnaya from Samara, which is exactly what she is, but this is not the sample that Natalia is. And she's actually getting modeled as a mixture of this Samara sample plus, I think I have made a video on him, plus Satsurblia or Kotiaskide plus Caucasus hunter-gatherers. And finally, in terms of the greater picture, this is what she scores with Gidrosia K3. As you can see, she's mostly West Eurasian. You could say this individual is quite white in terms of ancestry. Now we'll be moving on to the results with my trait predictor tool. Let's start with Andrew. Andrew has AA in Combs-Valmet variation, meaning MET genotype, meaning he's definitely a warrior, and he's got slower breakdown of dopamine, more dopamine accumulating in his system. But he does have GG in MAOA's RS6323, which actually leads to warrior genotype in MAOA. So he's a warrior in MAOA, but warrior in COMT. Overall, he's probably got intermediate speed of dopamine reuptake, intermediate dopamine levels. He has two no-go learner variants in DRD2 spirophrenitin pro variation, which causes a reduction in the number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain and decreased risk of schizophrenia. Well, this and this are very stereotypically European genotypes to have. I just want to make this remark here. He does not carry the European lactose persistence mutation, and he's got this genotype which leads to lower risk of various autoimmune disorders and type 1 diabetes. He's not genotype for this variation, which is the most important for type 1 diabetes, right? But if you look at this genotype here and here, he most likely has lower odds of type 2 diabetes. We're going to see what his polygenic risk score for that is in a couple seconds. He's got CC in this variation, RS669, which leads to a decreased risk of Alzheimer's. I mean, increased. So yeah, this is like a free this increases the risk of Alzheimer's by a factor of like 3 point something. So he's going to have a significantly higher odds of Alzheimer's than what's typical for the average person. And no micro P. You know what micro P is? I'm not going to spell it out for you because it's not YouTube appropriate, but he does not have micro P. He's got a mix of muscle types, likely one sprinter, one endurance athlete, allele, and no fat gene variants, so he probably not obese, does not have photic sneeze reflex, and lower odds of cannabis-induced psychosis. I don't know if, I think the Yamnaya did. I think they did smoke cannabis recreationally. And not a carrier for albinism type 1b. And now let's see polygenic risk scores for Andrew. Andrew has a very average odds of schizophrenia for Northern Europeans, but much lower odds of schizophrenia than what's typical for sub-Saharan Africans. He's got lower odds of diabetes than what's typical for the average person, and he's got, as I said he would have like much higher odds of Alzheimer's by a factor of like 3. Well, there you go. This is not quite 3. I think this there's a couple other variations that are not shown on the screen that affect the score, but he's got a much higher odds of Alzheimer's, and this is mostly because of this genotype right here. So this is Andrew. Now let's move on to Matthew. Matthew has got TT genotype in this MAOA variation, which actually leads to lower activity of the MAOA enzyme and slower breakdown of dopamine. What this means, I'm going to simplify this for you. This means warrior genotype, and this is the genotype you would typically expect to see in a European person. He does not have any no-go variants in DRD2's Pro and in Pro variation, kind of the opposite. His genotype is pretty much the opposite of Andrew in these variations, okay? None of this is genotype, none of this is in the file. He's got AC here, which leads to a slight decrease in the risk of type 1 diabetes. By the way, slight decrease relative to the AA genotype, right? So people with the AA genotype have a much higher odds of type 1 diabetes. And most people have CC, which leads to 7-fold decrease in the risk of type 1 diabetes relative to the AA genotype, right? So this individual has a slight decrease relative to the individuals with the AA genotype, but relative to me and you, he's got a much higher odds of type 1 diabetes. So just based on this result alone, he probably has a slightly higher odds of type 1 diabetes than me or you. Just put it this way. Does not have any hemochromatosis variants, and for myopia, does not carry the G allele here, which would decrease the risk of myopia. In his case, he's got average or slightly higher odds of myopia. No micro P once again. I'm not going to spell this out for you. You know what that is. YouTube does not like comments like this. And 2 fat gene variants in FTO, so much higher odds of obesity and sleep apnea. By the way, yes, sleep apnea is actually related to the fat gene, and it is related to obesity. If you're obese, you are at a higher risk for this condition, which is kind of crazy. In case you don't know, sleep apnea is when you lose the ability to sleep. I mean, you lose the ability to breathe in your sleep. You kind of like go to sleep, and then there's periods where you just stop breathing. It's pretty scary. You might die. Not a carrier for albinism type 1b, and let's see polygenic risk scores. So for Matthew, he's got a much lower odds of schizophrenia, actually 4 times lower than what's typical for average Northern European. He's got a slightly higher odds of diabetes, and he's not genotype for anything related to Alzheimer's, so this is just kind of a non-score. Moving on to Natalia. Natalia has got GG in Combs-Valmet variation, meaning Val-Val genotype, meaning warrior genotype. So quicker breakdown of dopamine, less dopamine in the system. And she's got GG in this variation of MAOA, which actually leads to higher MAOA enzyme activity. Once again, this is a warrior genotype. So warrior in COMT, warrior and MAOA. And GG genotype in DRD2's Profenacin Pro. Actually, Profenacin Pro is not determined, but she's got GG here, which is predictive of the AA genotype in Profenacin Pro. So we can say that she does have the no-go variants. She has 2 no-go variants. Most likely we can say this because there's a phylogeny that exists between these 2 variations. And less dopamine D2 receptor sites and decreased risk of schizophrenia, but increased odds of like ADHD and other stuff that has to do with less dopamine activation. So for lactose persistence, not a carrier, does not have European lactose persistence mutation. For the empathy gene, 2 variants for higher levels of empathy in this variation of OXTR. The other 2 don't really matter all that much. For diabetes, CC here, which leads to 7-fold decrease in the risk of type 1 diabetes relative, as I've said previously, to the AA genotype. Most of you guys have CC here. Okay, and for Alzheimer's, this is none of this is genotyped, except here, but here she has TT, which actually leads to significantly, or I shouldn't say significantly, slightly decreased risk of Alzheimer's. So she's probably, her risk of Alzheimer's is probably going to be below 1. That's my assumption right now. I haven't seen the polygenic risk scores yet. Whoa, that's crazy. Okay, so she's heterozygous here, and she carries micro P mutation. I misspelled it here. I spelled it micro P, but she carries the micro P mutation. That's kind of interesting. Okay, that's surprising. I don't know. Could this be like a miscall or something? Because it's pretty rare from what I know. Okay, she doesn't have any fat gene variants in this variation of FTO, and she likely does not have photic sneeze reflex, but carries one allele for photic sneeze reflex. And she doesn't have any variants for increased pain sensitivity in this variation of SCN9A. Higher odds of methamphetamine-induced psychosis, so she probably shouldn't smoke meth, just like any of you guys. You also probably should not smoke meth regardless of your genotype. Probably not a good idea. And she's not a carrier of all cutaneous albinism type 1b. Let's see polygenic risk scores. For her, the polygenic risk scores are as such. Okay, so she has below average odds of Alzheimer's. As I've predicted, it would be below 1. It's super close to 1, but it's still below 1. She has average odds of type 2 diabetes, and she has significantly lower odds of schizophrenia than what's typical for Europeans. Actually, look at that. She has 5 times less odds of schizophrenia than what's typical for Northern Europeans. So if 0.4% of Northern Europeans have this illness, for her, the chances of her having this illness is like 0.08, right? It's very low chances, very low odds. Finally, we're moving to Sergey. Sergey does not have any no-go learner variants in their D2 profinance pro variation, GG genotype, which means higher number of dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain and higher likelihood of schizophrenia. He's got GG here, which actually leads to a slightly lower risk of schizophrenia. So he does not have the A allele here, which, for example, myself, I have 2 A alleles here, which is super rare, like extremely rare. But this individual has GG, and which is typical, which leads to slightly less dopamine D2 receptor sites in the brain, and does not have long form 5-HT-LPR, so he's got short form 5-HT-LPR. Just like most of you guys, you have short form 5-HT-LPR, slightly higher odds of depression and stuff that comes along with decreased ability to transport serotonin. Does not carry the European lactose persistence mutation and CC here, which is associated with increased OXTR expression and higher levels of empathy. Well, we're going to have to use this genotype right here to say that he's probably not a sociopath. The reason we do is because he's not genotyped for this variation. And he's got CC here for diabetes, which actually leads to 7-fold decrease in risk of type 1 diabetes. As I've said previously, this is 7-fold decrease relative to the AA genotype, not relative to the average person. Relative to the average person, he's got just a slightly lower, slightly below average odds of type 1 diabetes. Not 7-fold decrease, but it's 7-fold decrease relative to the AA genotype, which would be the opposite of him. And he's not a carrier for the C282Y hemochromatosis mutations, does not have hemochromatosis. For Alzheimer's, this is the only one he's genotyped for, or maybe, well, there's probably others, but this is the only one that's showing up on the screen, because there's a couple other variations. In fact, most of the variations that are used in the calculation are not shown on the screen. So, but here he's got GG, which leads to significantly higher odds of Alzheimer's, and no micro P. So he does not have micro P. The only individual who carried a allele for micro P was a woman. So for her, it doesn't matter all that much. And no fat gene variant, so doesn't have, not obese, doesn't have obesity. Likely does not have photic sneeze reflex. And CC here, which means higher susceptibility to methamphetamine-induced psychosis. Well, regardless of whether or not you have the genotype that makes you more susceptible to meth-induced psychosis, it's probably not a good idea to smoke meth. Not a carrier of cutaneous albinism type 2, not a carrier of any of the albinism mutations. It's just for fun. This stuff, most of the people, like, I don't think I've ever seen a sample that carried any of the albinism mutations. I don't think I've seen any. They are just so rare. Like, I will be surprised. I will be very surprised if in all my time on YouTube making videos, I will see even one person who carries one of the albinism mutations. Let's check the polygenic risk scores. So for polygenic risk scores, this is Sergey, right? Sergey, I'm gonna double check. Yes, this is Sergey. So Sergey has got okay, slightly higher odds of schizophrenia. That was typical for Northern Europeans. 2.5 times the average odds for schizophrenia. 2.5 times the average odds for Alzheimer's as well, and half the odds for diabetes. So doesn't have diabetes. I don't think he had schizophrenia either, because it's just such a rare disease. Like, I mean, it's literally like 0.4%. So it's probably not him with his odds. But Alzheimer's is pretty common. I think something like 10% of elderly people develop Alzheimer's. So it's pretty possible that he had Alzheimer's based on these results. Well, thanks for watching my video until the end. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. You can download all 4 of these samples in 23andMe format from link which is in the description of the video. And thanks for watching. Goodbye.